Is that this bill be now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Greenway.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I welcome the opportunity to speak on this bill, and it gives me the opportunity to highlight the fact that access to high-quality, real broadband is one of the most fundamental issues facing the electorate of Greenway. Indeed, it is probably the single biggest issue on which I received unsolicited representations from residents in all parts of the electorate. And as I warned prior to the last election, the electorate of Greenway has been divided into an electorate of NBN haves and have-nots. We have those fortunate people who have managed to obtain the real NBN, Labor's fibre-to-the-home network, prior to the last election. And we have other areas of the electorate where people literally look across the road and they see people who don't have broadband and certainly don't have the NBN. I want to take this opportunity to highlight a few matters. The first is to point out not only how potent this issue is, but also the fact that residents understand why broadband is important. They understand many of the technical issues that we probably think are beyond them. They are savvy people, and I can tell you this as well. They know they are not getting the promise that was delivered by this Prime Minister when he was the Communications Minister. Right. They know that they were promised to have minimum speeds delivered by the end of 2016. That promise was made by the current Prime Minister in 2013. It did not even last the year. That was one of the first promises to be broken by this government. I want to take the opportunity to highlight a few other issues, in particular how lack of affordable and reliable broadband is impacting on small business, the changing nature of small business and why more than ever we need to get this investment in real infrastructure done, and the importance of recognising that innovation can't just be talk. It cannot just be talk. It needs to have the underlying fundamentals of infrastructure going along with it. And lastly, and throughout, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to give an opportunity to talk about some of the lived experiences of my constituents, be it in small business, be it in school, being in their home use, the level of frustration at this issue, and in particular the level of frustration with the government, who came in here, and just as the last speaker got up and basically said Labor had botched this job and they're going to do it better. That was more than 2.5 years ago. More than 2.5 years ago. Completely failed to live up to its promise. And I'm not surprised that this morning's Sydney Morning Herald, we see the headline, Turnbull's NBN plan in crisis. There's never been a clearer example of this Prime Minister and this government being all talk and no action. Apparently he invented the internet. Apparently he was given the task by then Prime Minister Abbott to demolish or destroy the NBN. Well, effectively he did that. He did that through the most misguided means of thinking that he could make such promises and not deliver on them, and turn his back on not only the science and the physics, but also the reality of what is involved in building the biggest infrastructure project in Australia since the Snowy Mountains scheme. He thought he had all the answers. He thought he had them all. He made all these promises and absolutely failed to deliver. His mantra was that it was going to be fast, affordable, sooner. Fail, fail and fail by this Prime Minister. And it is worth noting some of the commentary in today's headline. And I quote, "The report," that is this report about the epic fail that has become the NBN under this government, "the report, which was never intended for public disclosure, reveals the extent to which the more than $46 billion project has drifted off course, mainly during the time when Mr Turnbull was in direct control as Communications Minister." And I also quote, "The NBN Co's own documents show that for all the money it remains bedevilled with problems from the slow design approvals by power companies," noting, and I quote, "fibre to the premises did not require electrical supply, but fibre to the node does, and as a result of material and supply problems, even expertise in dealing with the copper network is scarce." Well, it's pretty fundamental. You know, when he was minister, the Prime Minister would come in here and say, "Oh, NBN Co didn't know how to dig holes." Well, you think NBN Co would know that you need an electricity supply, would know that you need these fundamental things, would know that you actually need some technicians who know how to deal with copper. And I note the current Communications Minister, Fifield, his response today. The Coalition had taken a and I quote, business-like approach to the project. Well, if this is business, they'd be out of business. They'd be out of business, Mr Deputy Speaker. And you only have to look, when you examine the importance of high-speed broadband, to the changing nature of work. And one of the terms that's become quite common now is understanding the notion of freelance work, freelancers, as we like to call them. And I note an article, a most informative article by Rich Pearson of Upwork in Business Insider on the 23rd of February. And he notes that the freelance economy is growing. And I quote, while the government is moving in the right direction by putting innovation at the forefront of the agenda, they need to more substantively support this statement by investing in digital infrastructure in order to maximise the potential of this growing segment of the workforce. The move towards an ideas boom is a great first step, but they haven't fully executed their vision. And one key ingredient that is listed here in order to achieve that: building a future-proof, world-class national broadband network. According to a Nielsen report, 3/4 of the nation's businesses believe a national broadband infrastructure will increase their ability to engage in the digital economy. Now, this is a fact that has been known for some time, and I even quote from a Deloitte Access Economics report from September 2013, which noted that households would reap the benefits of a boosted e-commerce industry. And they even go so far as to quantify the benefits that would accrue to certain types of cohorts if the national broadband network is built. And I note, a single-income couple that runs a small business and has 2 children could be more than $7,000 a year better off due to factors including boosted productivity and better education opportunities for their children. And even if you don't want to take it from that study, you can have a look at the report that's been put out by the New South Wales government. And we see the New South Wales Minister for Small Business, and he's there smiling at the front of a document talking about the opportunities for business. And he makes great use of saying technology advances create opportunities and risks for businesses of all sizes, and goes into the NBN, talking about how it's a large infrastructure project to significantly increase internet connection speeds for businesses and households, and notes that small businesses can indeed benefit from this. Right. Now, it's no secret, but let's look at how this is actually failing small businesses in practice by not having a real NBN and by this government failing to deliver on its promise. And I quote an insightful article by Eloise Keating, for example, Australian SMEs failing to get on board with cloud computing. And it's quoting from Sam Bashri, founder of Smart 50 finalist Board Solutions, who told Smart Company, in the overall scheme of things, the NBN will change things for the better for companies like his own, which offers broadband products in the B2B market. And I quote, but he says the proposed benefit of the NBN have been thrown around for way too long, and to date the connections that have been rolled out have been focused on residential users rather than businesses. Now, I totally agree the importance of rolling out this project to every business and every household. That has been the entire aim of this project as devised under Labor. But what we see happening here under this government is lip service given to the importance of broadband for small businesses. And I note again from PwC's Small Business Digital Growth Report, and it notes small businesses will only realise the benefits of internet and mobile technology adoption if the underlying infrastructure and the software running on the infrastructure provides them with a suitable level of reliability. And it's at this point, Mr Deputy Speaker, that I can indeed turn to another real-life example. And one of these announcements we've had from the government in the past year or so has been single-touch payroll. And I see an announcement by the then Minister Frydenberg in December 2014. But as has been examined and reported in Smart Company in July last year, under the heading "The Role of Single-Touch Payroll Treats Businesses with Contempt," it notes some small businesses are pretty much ready for a system such as single-touch payroll to be rolled out, as they've moved to cloud accounting software. However, many have not moved to these cloud systems, and many will not at the moment, as their internet access is too slow. Enter Communications Minister Malcolm Turnbull. The Communications Minister would have us believe that the rollout of the NBN is going swimmingly and that in this country we have no issues with getting internet access at reasonable speeds. Now, this doesn't even pass the bull dust test, as people try and use the internet for their daily business, and many know it's not up to scratch. Mr Deputy Speaker, this is the reality for small businesses, and in particular I note the large and growing number of small businesses who actually operate from home. And again, looking at Renee LeMay's article in Delimiter, the performance of data uploading features strongly in a variety of case studies of IONET's small business customers. In all cases, upload performance is the key to their purchasing decision. Nowhere in the strategic review, this is the strategic review undertaken by the then Minister Turnbull, nowhere in the strategic review is there any consideration of upload performance to the small business sector of the economy or at all. Any business utilising broadband will confirm that upload performance is mission critical, and yet little attention has been given to this issue, which is strategically important to the Australian digital economy. Mr Deputy Speaker, it goes on. We have a situation where then Minister Turnbull rejected claims that if businesses and residences wanted to have fibre cables extended, he argued that it would not cost the amount of money that we in Labor estimated it would. But even looking at this recent example, again as reported by Renee LeMay, the NBN has given a Newcastle business an estimate ranging from up to $9,500 to extend fibre cables 300 metres from the local street-side node through existing Telstra pipes to their facility in the Newcastle CBD, as signals continue to grow that the Coalition's election estimates on fibre-on-demand costs were inaccurate. Well, I note, Mr Deputy Speaker, this is hitting home in Greenway. And I note that before the last election, the Coalition announced that it was going to reassess broadband rollout to the western suburbs. And I see in Hills News, the then Shadow Minister Turnbull was quoted. Mr Turnbull said that the Coalition's fibre-to-the-node policy would prioritise businesses, schools and employment areas before homes. Now, this is most confusing. As I said, Mr Deputy Speaker, I argued before the election, and as we've seen after the election, we are creating a divided society in the electorate of Greenway. And here I can quote from some real-life examples. I have an email here from Previn from Acacia Gardens. My request is for you to help get Acacia Gardens onto the NBN rollout schedule. I feel for anyone living in Acacia Gardens who is trying to run a home business. I've had to purchase extra wireless internet cards so that my wife can do her schoolwork, and at times it's too slow for even Google documents to work. And I note also a recent one I've had from Mr and Mrs Watson from Kings Langley. We've been told by every internet provider they're unable to provide internet in our area because there are no ports available. We're currently using a mobile hotspot for internet, paying $49.95 a month for 1 GB. When we go over our allowance, our internet slows down to excruciatingly slow speeds. We are not prepared to wait until the earliest estimated time of delivery of the NBN, which is the first half of 2017. This is over a year away. I also note an email I've received from Narinda from Glenwood. It becomes really difficult to work from home for my son, as it takes a lot of time to upload files and share data with his office. From Simon in Glenwood, I manage and provide technical support for corporate IT systems which have very high availability SLAs. And when I work on a customer problem, I need reliable network, otherwise it can compromise my efforts in solving issues for my customers in a timely manner. And here we have Cheryl from the Ponds. The NBN is all around me, and my next-door neighbour was lucky enough to have the internet installed through Telstra. It seems the Ponds is hit and miss with internet services, and from what I found out from my inquiries, I'm really frustrated. And here I have a number of other constituents, Mr Deputy Speaker. I could go on all day from the number of people whom I have contacting me saying that it's simply not good enough. If we are serious in Australia about having world-class broadband, we need to ensure that we get the underlying infrastructure right. This government needs to acknowledge that it has botched, with its multi-technology mix, completely botched delivery of world-class broadband services. Now, I see members are going to come in here and probably talk about, I've no doubt, saying that they are improving on a situation. The reality is it's not being improved. It's not being improved. Residents in my electorate understand perfectly well that they have been missing out under this government. They promised big time, over-promised and have completely failed to deliver. And we can sit here and we can argue about it, and I'm very happy to do that, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I can give real-life examples. But the reality is that unless this Prime Minister starts showing some leadership when it comes to delivering world-class broadband, it is going to remain exactly what it is. It is going to be all talk and absolutely no delivery for the people of Australia.
Well, the question is that this bill we now read a second time to call the honourable member for Lyons.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. If there ever has been a more poorly considered project, I'm yet to discover what it is. Labor's plan to deliver the NBN that was developed on the back of a drinks coaster, indeed, has left this nation wondering truly what they were up to. They were very good at delivering fibre to the press release, Deputy Speaker, but unfortunately the connections that they made during their time in government left a lot of people wondering what it was all about. And indeed, the notion that you can have what Labor promised being absolutely a pipe dream, Deputy Speaker, and that you can't have high-quality cheap and build quickly at the same time, and that's effectively what Labor promised, is evidence of the complete inability of those on the other side to roll out what is one of the most complex and technically challenging projects that our nation has undertaken. And this is why, as a government, when we came to government, we recognised, like so many other jurisdictions around the world, a multi-mixed technology, a large country, that it simply was not feasible to deliver fibre to the premise to some of the communities. I know, Deputy Speaker, in your electorate, as in mine, it was simply inconceivable that they would be able to have fibre to the premise. So what we proposed was a multi-mixed technology, similar to what is available in other parts of the world, that is delivering the highest quality speeds, but also, importantly, Deputy Speaker, in a way that allowed regional and rural areas of Australia to be able to have access to fast and reliable broadband that had only previously been the privy of those living in inner cities around Australia, that already, Deputy Speaker, had quite reasonable ADSL coverage and speeds that were available to them. More's the pity for those communities that live in regional areas of Australia. They had been effectively, by Labor, left off the map. So one of the things on coming to government was to prioritise those areas of the country that had little or no access to fast data. And so 25 megabits down and 5 megabits up across the nation was, I guess, that was the base package which we are in the process of delivering. And it's quite interesting to note, Deputy Speaker, that in Tasmania, which is more advanced, it's true, in terms of the rollout of the NBN, despite the hiccups that occurred under those opposite, it's quite interesting if you look at the uptake of the speeds to those premises that do have access to fibre to the premise. It's quite interesting if you look at those that are choosing more than the base package of 25 down, 5 megabits per second up. In fact, there is less than 10% of those that have taken advantage of the connections that have chosen the 100 megabit per second 40 upload speeds. That is primarily going to be, of course, businesses, and indeed, Deputy Speaker, they pay for that privilege. The vast majority, in fact 86% of all of those that have connected to the fibre to the premise that is available around Tasmania have connected at 25.5 or indeed less. And it's quite interesting to note that in the trials that have been recently conducted in Queensland, and I'm very pleased to say also in my electorate of Lyons, the townships of Evandale, Western Junction and Breadalbin will be very soon connected to fibre to the nodes connections. And I note that the trials that have been completed recently in Queensland highlight speeds which are extraordinary and will provide speeds quite comparable to what is available to fibre to the premise users. And so it is, Deputy Speaker, that around the world this has been the experience previously, but those on the other side knew better. In the electorate of Lyons, which is a diverse rural and regional electorate, we also have large areas of the electorate that, again, were never, despite what you hear promised despite what you hear from those opposite, we're never going to get connected by fibre to the premise. So large areas of my electorate are able to access very, very good speeds on the wireless service, Deputy Speaker. In fact, there are in the electorate of Lyons 17,523 premises that can access the NBN via the wireless service. The interesting thing, and I guess I would encourage, albeit that there are a number there that are still in build. There's about 2,000 of that 17,500 that are still in build, but those that are able to be that are able to connect via those wireless services, there is actually only around 4,500 people that have chosen to connect to the NBN that's been available. In some cases, since the middle of June 2013, as early as 2013, and I look, for example, at the New Norfolk Tower, for example, that covers 432 premises. The activation take-up rate is, in fact, only 34%, Deputy Speaker. There are some that are better than others, but, for example, Lyle, again down in the Derwent Valley, 133 premises, of which only 23 have connected 17%. Some, of course, are higher than that. Indeed, the 41% of those on the Mount Direction Tower have connected 400 out of 444 connections. So the message, I guess, from the people of Lyons is that overwhelmingly the wireless connections have proved to be a very simple way of being able to connect to the NBN, that it's been quite a seamless process. It certainly hasn't involved the digging up of backyards, as has been the case in many of those communities, and a number of those communities in my electorate indeed were part of that early rollout under the former government in Deloraine, in Midway Point, parts of Sorrel, St Helens and indeed Triabunna. And look, the stories that we've had of backyards being dug up, of people that were making appointments and the appointments were cancelled, just shows the complexity of the build in that area, particularly in those remote and regional areas. So this is why I'm so pleased that, and I had the opportunity with the staff from NBN to go out and inspect, as I say, the first of the nodes that's been constructed in the township of Evandale, just outside of Launceston, and there's expected to be, if you could just bear with me, Deputy Speaker, there's expected to be 800 premises between Western Junction and Evandale that will be connected by May of this year to the fibre to the node technology, which, as I say, is delivering for a price, albeit, and those that wish to pay a higher price will be able to access speeds that on some of the trials have been approaching 100 download and 40 upload. So these are the sorts of speeds that are available on fibre to the premise, as similarly are available on fibre to the node. Of course, most households won't choose those speeds because a 25 down, 5 up service allows you to, for example, in most households, stream on Netflix or iView or SBS online up to 5 or 6 services at the one time. Now, you know, the social cost that brings in a family, Deputy Speaker, is for others to judge. But nevertheless, the technology of that speed allows more than what most households will require. So there is a lot of noise in this space. There's a lot of noise in this space, and indeed, if small businesses want faster speeds than that described, those will be available and they'll pay for it. But the truth of it is, in most areas in my electorate, the speeds available through wireless, through fibre to the node, and of course from the middle of this year, the satellite services, and many of those more remote areas of my electorate will be able to access through the 2 SkyMuster satellites that have been launched and will be coming online in the middle of the year. For the first time, we'll be able to access fast broadband speeds that simply were a dream, that would have been a dream, as I say, under those opposites. So this is good news overwhelmingly for the people of my electorate. As I mentioned, there are a number of communities there that have access to fibre to the premise. Increasingly we'll see the rollout expanded very, very quickly in Evandale, in Exeter, Lenina and the communities down the West Tamar will be able to soon be able to access fibre to the node services. I mentioned Gravelly Beach, Lenina, Rosevears, Swan Point, Blackwell, and of course Westbury and Hagley. And I note the disappointment of the Meander Valley Council. They recently had a report produced at their request, which cost them, I understand, somewhat over $10,000, which they requested that was passed by the council at the instigation of one of their councillors, and they were disappointed with the information that was provided. And you know, it's a question, I guess, for the ratepayers of the Meander Valley as to whether that was money well spent by their council, because they also very soon in Westbury and Hagley, 1,100 premises or thereabouts, be able to access through fibre to the node technology some of the fastest speeds that are available on the NBN. But as I go back to my original point, Deputy Speaker, of those premises that have had access to NBN for a large period of time, and in some cases since the middle of 2014, 86% of those retail customers are choosing speeds of 25.5 or lower, because they're getting good. They're able to do everything that they need to do with those sorts of speeds. For business, of course, it will be slightly different, and those faster speeds are going to be available through the mix of technologies that are being rolled out around the electorate of Lyons as we speak. So overwhelmingly, Deputy Speaker, it is a good story as far as the rollout of the NBN in my electorate, and as I say, I'm very pleased to see now that there are communities that we've almost completed the wireless rollout. There's only now 4,000 premises that are still in a build phase, and I note the Coles Bay East Tower, which had struck a planning hurdle with the tower being located in the National Park at Coles Bay. That's been overcome now, and so for the tourist town of Coles Bay, Freycinet, for those that might know that on the east coast of Tasmania, a very, very lovely part of our state in my electorate, those tourist operators will now be able to offer to the increasing numbers of mainland and international tourists that are coming to Tasmania to enjoy what we have to offer, speeds that they expect. So they're very happy about that. The fibre to the node rollout is commencing, as I mentioned, in those towns, Evandale and along the West Tamar will be the first, and not long after that, of course, you'll see a fibre to the node being rolled out in Westbury and Hagley in the Meander Valley, of course, Bicheno on the east coast, Campbelltown, Dodgers Ferry in the southeast, a growing area of my electorate. Exeter, I mentioned. Longford, of course, is one of the major towns in the Northern Midlands. New Norfolk, certainly a large town there, and it will be a simple process. So, you know, people won't have to, as I say, have their backyards dig up, and certainly in the township of Evandale, where there are a lot of heritage houses, that's the last thing that they needed. So the simplicity of being able to connect to and be able to access very, very fast speeds through fibre to the node is indeed welcomed, I think, by the overwhelming majority of the people in my electorate that previously haven't had access to really data connections anywhere approaching these speeds. And so regional Australia finally is being considered and has been made a priority for the rollout under this current government. Deputy Speaker, I thank the House for the opportunity to contribute on this debate.
The question is, this bill we now read a second time, and I call the honourable member for Kingsford Smith.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The changes made to the telecommunications legislation in this bill perfectly represent the chaos and dysfunction of this government, and what a complete mess this government has made of the rollout of the national broadband network across Australia. Probably one of the biggest and most important infrastructure projects of recent decades, and all this government has done is seek to score political points in the manner in which they've changed the project and introduced a new regime. This bill, in its original form, Deputy Speaker, was introduced into the House of Representatives on the 2nd of December 2015. And what it does is it codifies many of the recommendations of a review that was established by Prime Minister Turnbull when he was the Minister for Communications. When they were in opposition, the current government promised an independent review of the operation of the national broadband network and its future. Well, we didn't get that independent review. What we got was a partisan review. The Vertican panel, as it's become known, was appointed with former Liberal Party staffers. They're the people that they appointed to this review to look at the national broadband network. And all of them have been critics of Labor's approach to the national broadband network in the past. Now, unsurprisingly, this Vertican review recommended the rollback of a number of Labor's competition and consumer-friendly reforms that underpinned the national broadband network. That important reform, or that important principle of universal access to telecommunications throughout the whole of Australia, was at threat because of the recommendations made by the Vertican panel. And one of those was that they made a recommendation to axe the universal national wholesale pricing regime. And this is the one which ensures that Australians who are living in rural and regional areas pay the same wholesale price for equivalent services as people living in the big cities. Now, this is a principle which Labor put in place to ensure that you have fairness and equity in telecommunication service delivery in this country. We all know that Australia is a very big nation, and the tyranny of distance has been a challenge for people living in rural and regional communities when it comes to accessing government services. So Labor put in place this universal national wholesale pricing regime to ensure that, regardless of where you lived in Australia, you paid the same wholesale price to access what are now vitally important and essential telecommunication services. Well, this review, the Vertican review, recommended watering that down. Now, the question I have, Deputy Speaker, is where is the National Party on an issue such as this? Where is the National Party when it comes to important government services like telecommunications and the prospect of having that national wholesale pricing, universal national wholesale pricing regime undermined? So this report was clearly a biased report. It was clearly put in place for political means, not what was in the best interests of the nation and how we would get better telecommunication services that are world-class. And that's ultimately what is behind the national broadband network that Labor put in place. We want world-class telecommunication services. Other nations throughout the world are achieving speeds of up to 100 megabits per second when it comes to accessing the internet. Well, there are not too many premises, houses or businesses in Australia that were able to access those speeds, and that was why we built and intended to build fibre optic cable to the premises, because that is what the rest of the world is doing. That is what a modern telecommunication system looks like, not the one that this government has sought to introduce for purely political means, purely to try and say that their version was cheaper than Labor's and that their version would be rolled out more quickly. So in the end, what they've done is a half-baked NBN. It's an inferior system. It's a second-rate system for our nation. And that's unacceptable in modern-day Australia. And a wealthy nation like Australia, with the government services that we have, shouldn't put up with a second-rate system. And that is why Labor has been critical of what this government is doing with the National Broadband Network. But it is not just the Labor Party that is critical. There's much independent analysis of what this government's been doing to the National Broadband Network and the recommendations of the verdict and review and the amendments that are made through this bill and the effects that they're having on the delivery of the National Broadband Network. And I'll quote some of them for you, Deputy Speaker, because I think they perfectly highlight what this government is up to when it comes to the National Broadband Network. Professor Graham Samuel, the former head of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, who, if anyone knows anything about accessing telecommunication services, ensuring competition and fair access, this person knows a bit about that. And Professor Graham Samuel said this, quote, "Multiple reviews at vast cost have been completed, primarily focused on demonstrating that the Labor government's NBN concept was flawed, or at least was less economically viable than that of the coalition. Unfortunately, much of the review analysis has had a political tarnish, which diminishes its value in forward planning for this important infrastructure project." End quote. I couldn't have summed it up better, Deputy Speaker. Professor Graham Samuel has hit the nail on the head. With this government, it is all about political point scoring, rather than delivering a first-rate national broadband network and doing what is in the interests of Australians across the whole of the nation. The Senate Select Committee that had a look at the review of the National Broadband Network, the so-called independent cost-benefit analysis that was part of the verdict and panel's review, had this to say about it, Deputy Speaker, quote, "The cost-benefit analysis is a deeply flawed and overtly political document. It is not credible and is not a reliable basis upon which to make decisions about the National Broadband Network." End quote. That's what the Senate committee said about the verdict and panel. But what does this government do? Well, they're amending the telecommunications legislation based on what is a deeply flawed and clearly biased political report. And unfortunately, all Australians will suffer because of this. Now, Labor indicated that would oppose those elements of this bill, those elements that are the flawed parts of the bill that come from this clearly biased and politically motivated review, and they include parts 3, 4, 5, 7 and 8 of the telecommunications legislation. So we indicated to the government that we wouldn't support those parts of the bill. What does the government do? Well, at the last minute they withdraw those parts from the bill. They're amending their own legislation to withdraw those parts from the bill, because they've even worked out that they're deeply offensive, that they come from a politically biased report, and that they're not in the best interests of Australia. And this is the way this government is doing policy on one of the most important infrastructure projects in our nation's history. They are making it up as they go, Deputy Speaker, as we've seen in a number of policy areas now: tax reform, competition policy, other important economic principles. They're making these policies up as they go because they don't have a clear plan for the country and they don't have a clear economic vision for our nation. And I must say that I think in this policy area and in a number of other policy areas that the Australian people are suffering from the constant changes that are occurring in terms of ministers being replaced, leadership ballots, people having to resign because they've done the wrong thing as ministers. All of this revolving door of ministerial appointments is having an effect on good government in this country. We all know that these are big portfolios, particularly this one, and it takes a long time for a new minister to get across the issues, to meet with all the players that operate and stakeholders that operate in that area. And clearly the government is suffering for this. Clearly the government is suffering from this. And what we've seen here is that at the last minute the government seeks to amend their own legislation because they've worked out that it's flawed and the Australian people are suffering. And this is symbolic of this government's approach to the National Broadband Network and policy development more generally. Now, Deputy Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, these reviews have been aimed at political point scoring. trying to blame the Labor Party rather than what's good policy, and the people of Australia have been suffering. And we're going to be saddled with a second-rate national broadband network. Now, every other broadband network throughout the country in developed nations is delivering fibre optic cable to the premises. Why? Because that's the latest technology. That's the latest and most up-to-date technology. So nations across the whole of Europe, much of the United States, are delivering the best technology for their citizens. Now, why wouldn't Australia do the same thing? Well, we were, Deputy Speaker. We were under the original plan of the previous Labor government. And sure, there were some teething problems in the early days. There are with big infrastructure projects. We all know that. But at the end of the day, you're better off because you have an up-to-date system that delivers first-class and world-class communications technology for its citizens. Well, this government has just sought to score political points, to try and blame Labor and introduce an inferior system so that they can say that it's cheaper to the Labor parties. Well, it is inferior, because instead of getting fibre to the home and fibre to the business, fibre optic cable, the latest technology, you get fibre optic cable to the end of the street, and then the information runs down the old copper network. Now, the copper network was installed before the first man walked on the moon. That's how old it is. It goes back to before the 1960s. So here we have first-rate technology delivering information to the node and then slow as a wet week down the copper network to the home. And naturally we're seeing the consequences of that. And some of the testimonials from people who've connected to this new system are quite shocking. Because guess what? At the end of the day, when everyone goes home and gets on the system, gets on the internet, it slows it down. It's using outdated technology. And Australians are suffering. We've had testimonials from people who've been connected saying, bring back my ADSL2 connection, because what they've given us here is inferior to even that old technology. And we've seen in a number of areas that the government isn't meeting the targets that it set for itself. And Malcolm Turnbull, as the now Prime Minister when he was Communications Minister, said that the second-rate NBN would only cost $41 billion. And 2 years on, what we've seen in the reports that have been released of progress on the delivery of the NBN, that the second-rate NBN will actually cost up to $56 billion. So a 37% increase in the cost. The cost to connect to the home, to fibre to the node, the Prime Minister said that previously that this would cost about $600. What we're actually seeing is it's costing $1,600, a 167% increase in the cost of connecting to the technology. And this is something that Labor said would be an issue. Under our system, we had a reasonable price to connect. Everyone paid, wholesale, everyone paid had the same access. There may have been differences in plans and the like, but there was competition at that end and people could make their own choices. We said that you pay more to connect to lousy, inferior technology, and that is exactly what is occurring. The Prime Minister said that it would cost $55 million to fix up the copper network. It's actually costing $641 million to fix up the copper network. And I've had a number of Telstra technicians that live in my electorate that have come to me and said they could not believe that they're actually using the old, rusty, outdated copper network to connect people to the national broadband network. It's almost criminal to call it the national broadband network, given in the way that you're connecting through this second-rate technology. So, with all these changes in ministers in this area, with a new Prime Minister, with all of these partisan reviews that have been conducted, which are clearly out to just try and score points against the Labor Party, we've seen an inferior national broadband network developed for this country. And the people of Australia are suffering. In my community, in the community of Kingsford Smith, under Labor's plan, we would have been receiving the national broadband network now. Fibre to the premises was being rolled out from July 2015 in Kensington and Kingsford, and gradually making its way east and south across the whole of the electorate. Well, when the Liberals came to government, they stopped the rollout of the national broadband network in our community, took us off the rollout map. And the people of my community have suffered ever since. We've got a handful of unit developments, brand new unit developments, that have the national broadband network, and that is it. That is it, Deputy Speaker. No one else is getting the fibre to the home or business national broadband network that they are rightly entitled to and should expect from a modern-day Australian government. What is being delivered is an inferior system. People in areas and communities like mine have been taken off the rollout map, and it's clearly not good enough. And the changes that have been made to this bill at the last minute clearly reflect the fact that this government is completely ballsing up the national broadband network rollout and the chaos and dysfunction that is affecting policy development of this government.
I thank the member for Kingsford Smith and give the call to the member for Reid.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I move that discussion on this bill be moved and made a later order of the day.
Order of the day for the
debate be adjourned. A later hour in the day.
question is that the debate be adjourned and resumption of debate be made in order of the day for later this day. All those opinions say aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The